Hello, this is Botany and Plant Sciences course 031, Spring Wildflowers. This is the lecture corresponding to Friday, May the 29th of year 2020, which is the week 9 of our course, lecture number 3, the final lecture of week 9. We're almost done. Next Monday, we're going to see ferns. That will be the last true lecture, because from there onwards, we're going to do Wednesday and Friday review of the whole course and do some intellectual gymnastics to prepare you for the final exam. What we're seeing today is a large group of plants known as the Gymnosperms. We did discuss Gymnosperms at the beginning of the course when we talked about the evolution of plants on land. Gymnosperms preceded flowering plants. The name gymnos means naked, sperm means seed, so it's naked seed. There are plants that have no true flowers but have bracts that support the reproductive cells, either support the ovules or support a structure called the sporangium that produces pollen that flies around onto other plants. Most of the gymnosperms are wind pollinated. Pollination arose mostly with the evolution of the flower. So most of the gymnosperms are really wind pollinated, and they have their reproductive structures are normally organized in structures known as cones, because as we saw at the beginning of the course, the cones, like the pine cone, for example, are basically a stem, a very shortened stem with bracts around it. And in the bracts, you have the reproductive cells. Okay, let us share the screen to discuss a little bit what we're going to see today about gymnosperms. A simple way to identify gymnosperms, although there are exceptions, are basically look out for trees. There are very few shrubby gymnosperms, much less herbaceous gymnosperms. Gymnosperms are mostly woody trees, often large trees, with leaves that are linear and very often acicular, but at least normally the leaves are linear. The leaves don't have a reticulate venation structure like the dicotyledons. Basically, venation in the leaves is parallel, which shows that parallel venation was really an ancestral character. If we take into account that gymnosperms were around 200 or even longer, 200 million years ago or longer, and angiosperms have been around mostly for the last 65 million years. The reproductive structures are in male or female cones. Here in the illustration, you see female cone in a branch of Pinus ponderosa, the ponderosa pine. And you can see the bracts of the female cone organized in a cone-like structure. And you can see the bracts of the male cones that are normally much, much smaller, organized again in a little cone structure. In pines, the leaves are acicular, which means needle-like. In whorls of 3 or more in some pine species, supported by a basal sheath. Here we have a cross-section of a gymnosperm cone. You can see the embryos that have developed from the ovules that were here, and you can see the central stem and the bracts. You can also see in this illustration here that the cones are really very shortened stems. You can see the stem with the bracts coming out and the sexual parts in on the bracts themselves, subtended or supported by the bracts. Another illustration of the same thing. Here you have a cone scale, or a series of cone scales around a central axis, in this case a woody axis, and you can see the ovules sitting in the cone scales before fertilization. This is not always so simple. In some plants, like for example in the family Cicadaceae, we're going to discuss them in a little while. The fruits may look like or the mature seeds may look like fruits. Here they look pretty much like a drupe if you look at them. And the interpretation of this is more complex. So don't expect always to identify a gymnosperm, the perfect cone like a pine cone. The story can get more complicated, and many gymnosperms have fleshy cones or fleshy seeds, and we'll talk about that in a second. There's a group of gymnosperms that don't look like pines at all. They look more like palms. That group is known as the cycad lineage, or the Cycadophyta, which includes two families, the Cicadaceae and the Samiaceae. Many of them produce cones, especially the male parts produce cones, but some of them will produce the cones are so reduced and the ovules are fleshy that they look like a little raceme of fleshy fruits, really. The leaves in these plants look like palms. They're pinnate, they have a central rachis, and the parallel vein leaves coming on the sides. The Cycadaceae dominated the earth around 160 to 200 million years before present, and still in some parts of the world they can form dense forests. This is Cycas revoluta, known in Japanese as sago, that forms dense forests in the tropical wet Amami Islands in the southern part of the Japanese archipelago. And the Samiaceae look very similar. And the Samiaceae, it's more common to find perfect cones. You can tell immediately when you see this cone that this belongs in the gymnosperm. Sometimes the Cycadaceae, the cycas, have more fleshy structures that one has to look at them in some detail to realize it's a cone. Another interesting family and lineage within the gymnosperms is this amazing tree known as Ginkgo biloba. We normally call it ginkgo. Ginkgo looks at a first glance, it looks pretty much like a modern tree. It has leaves. It doesn't have needles like pines or linear structures or scales like junipers. It has large flat leaves. But when you look at the leaves, they're quote unquote bizarre. They look almost like some transformed petiole or something because of the parallel venation. They sort of radiate like a fan from a central point and have a very, very strict parallel venation, like in the whole group of gymnosperms. Remember what I told you, reticulate venation is a modern quote-unquote invention. It's an adaptation of the flowering plants of the angiosperms. The gymnosperms all have much more simple arrays of vascular tissue in the leaves. Ginkgos are common in California. They plant them all in gardens very frequently. There are a number of ginkgos in campus. They're all over the place. Really pretty plants. The ginkgo has a fascinating story. They call them the living fossil, which is an oxymoron, really, because if it's living, it's not a fossil. But what it means really is that the lineage of the ginkgos that we know was a large lineage in the middle of the Cretaceous and even before that in the Jurassic. The lineage of the ginkgos went almost completely extinct, with the exception of this tree, Ginkgo biloba, that survived in central China. And it reached a point in which it was only surviving basically because some monks were cultivating it in a monastery in central China. And at some point, people started trading the seed for cultivation, and the tree became a common garden plant. So it's a plant that really belonged in the Cretaceous, 150, 200 million years ago. The lineage is almost extinct, but it survives now in gardens all over the world. You can see here the male cones. When you see the male structure, you can tell immediately that it's a cone. You can see that it has a central axis with bracts that produce pollen. But the female cone, which is what you see here, is much more rarer. It has a bract, like all cones, and then it has a little stem with an ovule here and another branch with another ovule here. One of the two stems aborts, and the one that doesn't abort eventually becomes fertilized to produce the fruit. You can see here in the fruits, there's always the little scar of the one that aborted. The fruit really looks like a fruit. If you look at it in detail, sorry, it looks like a drupe. It looks like a peach in the ginkgo. But really, the external part of the fruit is the bract on which the naked, let me go back, this bract here that supported the naked embryo becomes fleshy and surrounds the fertilized embryo to produce what tastes like a fruit. Unfortunately, throughout California, gardeners will kill female ginkgos because the fruit smells like butyric acid, basically like vomit. But many animals in the past, and even some animals today, find the taste of butyric acid, the smell of butyric acid, quite attractive. And a proof of that is this fruit called durian from Southeast Asia. That is, a lot of people love it, a lot of people hate it, because the butyric acid gives us strong smell that might taste a little bit, might smell a little bit like vomit. The same with the ginkgo fruit. So people normally wait until the small ginkgos start reproducing, and they will kill the female ginkgos and plant the male ginkgos like this one because they don't produce foul-smelling fruits. I personally have a certain affection for female ginkgos. Now, perhaps the main family in the Gymnosperms is the pine family, the family Pinaceae. Mostly trees, sometimes shrubs, but mostly trees. And the leaves are linear to needle-like. The plants are monoecious. They have male and female cones, but in the same plant. The pollen is, oh, this is wrong. It's not born in corn. It's born in a cone with spirally arranged scales. The ovules are born in woody cones, much larger, also with spirally arranged scales that become woody as ovules become fertilized. The seeds are usually winged, but in pinyon pines, for example, they're not. They produce big nuts. And you can recognize them very, very clearly by the needle leaves, the cones, and they're almost unfailingly evergreen. Very important economically. Pines are one of our major sources of timber for construction and also pulp for paper. Here you have some illustrations of the typical pines. You can see the clusters of male cones here, also a cluster of male cones here, and the female cones forming up here and already ripe and open to release the seed. You can see some male cones here, and the leaves always in whorls. The leaves are brachyblasts, are lateral rosettes. They have some bracts, and then they have a fascicle, a whorl of leaves coming from the side. Not all pines have, or not all trees in the family Pinaceae have leaves in whorls. In other trees, like the fir, for example, here, the leaves are solitary and somewhat flatter. They look more like leaves. You have here in California, Abies concolor, which is in our high Sierras, the typical fir leaves. The cones are much more scaly. The bracts are not as woody as they are in the pine. The spruces also common in the Sierras in California, and a number of pines. We have dozens of pine species. California is one of the centers of diversity for pine species that still survive in our mountains, like Pinus attenuata, Pinus contorta, the lodgepole pine, Pinus ponderosa, the ponderosa pine, and also we have the western hemlock in this family, and perhaps very importantly, the bristlecone pine that has produced individuals that are really, really old. There are bristlecone pines that have almost 5,000 years of age. And because they produce annual growth rings, coring these pines has allowed scientists to project backwards cycles of aridity, of drought and rainfall in North America for thousands and thousands of years. The cypress family, it's normally smaller trees or shrubs, although some cypresses can be quite tall. The leaves are all shaped or linear, or sometimes scale-like, but they're never in needles like pines. And the ovules are in cones, mostly woody at maturity, except in the juniper, where the cone scales become fleshy. The cone scales in the family Cupressaceae have scales that become peltate. Let me show you here. You can see here they look like a little mushroom. The center of the cone of the scale is in the center, and it has like a little mushroom. It comes out on all sides, as opposed to the pine scale that look like little spoons. They're flat. So let me go back. The peltate scales, and in the case of junipers, like this one here, the fleshy berries are very, very distinctive traits. You can see here cypress. The leaves, as you can see, are much reduced compared to pines. Very often they're like scales or very reduced leaves. You can see the cones that become dry in the cypress and cupressus. But in the genus junipers and junipers, all the bracts in the cone fuse to make a structure that looks like a berry. Inside you have the seed, and if you dissect it, you will see that the fruit is formed by a series of different bracts, but they all become fused together and juicy. So the presence of fruit-like cones that look like a drupe or like an apple is typical of the juniper family. And of course, because they have resin, almost all gymnosperms have huge amounts of resin. The resin is used to give flavor to gin, has been used since medieval times by distillers in England and in Holland, basically both countries, to give flavor to gin. Once the gin is distilled, they throw in what they call a juniper berry. It's not a berry, really. It's a fleshy cone that releases some of the resin and gives the gin its very particular taste. Some California genera, Calosedrus decurrens, the incense cedar, very common around Riverside. Juniperus californica. If you drive from Riverside to Palm Desert, you will see formations of juniper when you cross the mountains. And of course, like all junipers, the fruits are fleshy. Cupressus lawsoniana, which is one of the cypresses that are really tall. It's called Fort Orford cedar, but it's not really a cedar. It's a cypress. Now, the family Taxodiaceae, the bold cypress family, this one is particularly important in California because this family includes really, really gigantic trees. The tallest known trees in the world, Sequoia sempervirens, the coast redwood, more than 100 meters tall. They're taller than large apartment buildings. And the most massive living organisms, although they don't get to grow that tall, Sequoia dendron giganteum, the giant redwood. So you have two redwoods, the coast redwood and the giant redwood, that form part of this family. That's why the family Taxodiaceae is so important. Both trees are totally emblematic of the state of California. Um, you can see that they have compound leaves in this case, with, it looks almost like a mesquite or something. You see the leaves coming out on their compound, although the the leaflets are linear as it should be in a plant of this family. The family, apart from the sequoias, also includes this beautiful tree, of which in Riverside we have a huge formation of them around the lake in Fairmont Park, which is the Montezuma cypress, Taxodium mucronatum. Called Montezuma cypress because in the good old times of the height of the Aztec Empire, around the lakes, this is a tree that wants a lot of water. It grows on lakesides, like it's almost like a cottonwood. Around the lakes of Mexico City was full of Montezuma cypress, and it ranges from Central America to California. You will find it growing very well in Fairmont Park. This is the same. It's a Montezuma cypress. It does have some interesting structures which are known as pneumatophores, which are elongations of the roots towards the outside that allows them to breathe, the roots to breathe, if they are in a continuously waterlogged soil. Of course, the coastal redwood, or simply known as the redwood, Sequoia sempervirens, is probably the emblem of California. It's a wonderful tree. It's the tallest tree in the world. And we have some parts of Riverside, like Redwood Street, is planted with tall redwoods, and it's really pretty. And of course, the giant redwood in the high Sierras near, you will find them if you go to Yosemite or to the Redwood National Forest there. The giant redwood has incredibly thick stems. The stems might be 30 meters wide, 30 feet wide, 10 meters wide. But they don't grow so tall because the wood is fairly soft, and they break once they reach a certain height. While the coastal redwood can grow, as I was saying, 300 feet or more, 100 meters or more. And we're almost done. The last family in the Gymnosperms is not trees, but it's really shrubs or vines. The family Ephedraceae, known as the Mormon tea. You will not see it in the wet part of California, but you will see it in large numbers in the California desert. So if you go to the Palm Desert, or you go to the Death Valley, you will see Mormon tea there. Known as Mormon tea because it's only one species that we have in California, Ephedra trifurca, common in the desert, because they say that when the Mormons migrated towards Utah and colonized Utah, if they were feeling sick, they would drink a tea with the leaves of this plant. You can see it's a green stem plant. It's not entirely herbaceous, but it's a very small shrub, a very low-lying shrub, never more than 2-3 feet high. You can see that it has the male and the female cones anyway, like any other proper gymnosperm. This is the type of landscape. I'm pretty sure if you've been in the desert, you will immediately be reminded of this landscape. This is the Mormon tea formations. It forms mounds because it branches from the root. And of course, Mormon tea was used the scientific name of the plant is Ephedra trifurca. And from the ephedras in general, not only Ephedra trifurca, you can obtain a chemical compound known as ephedrine that has been used for centuries by people to combat the symptoms of the common cold and the flu. It will clear your nose, it will clear your breathing passages and allow you to breathe well. For example, Advil Cold and Sinus contains ephedrine. Now, unfortunately, the sale of ephedrine is highly restricted because you can also use ephedrine, or ephedrine is at the basis of crystal meth. So you can use it to cook meth. and for this reason, it's controlled. But it's a really good natural medicine. You can use it for other more perhaps unnatural ways, but anyway, we owe this amazing natural product to a gymnosperm, ephedra trifurca. So this is everything with gymnosperms. Short class, but we could give an entire course on gymnosperms. They're so fascinating, so full of interesting things. But this is basically like a very quick visit to the group, to the taxon. And in a similarly quick visit next Monday, we're going to see the ferns. I thank you very much for your attention. And this is the end of our Friday lecture. Thank you.